Good evening. Sandwich Tollbridge Fund Finance Committee. If we can start. First of all, Town Clerk, are there any apologies for absences received?
Yes, there are, Chair. So Councillor Black has a travel commitment, Councillor E. Carter a mayoral commitment, and Councillor D. Carter a mayor's commitment.
Thank you. So moving on to agenda item 2, do we have any declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests for any items on tonight's agenda from anybody? No. Thank you. Agenda item 3, the minutes from the previous meeting on the 19th of June. They're included as attachment 1 in the pack. Are there any comments from anyone before we look to approve them? Yes, Councillor Anderson.
Yes, I did under the minute at 0624 stop 6. I did suggest that the application form for grants should indicate, give advice or guidance, but I would prefer it to be a word limit for many of the answers on the form, and I remember saying that at the meeting, but it hasn't been minuted. And there are 1 or 2 other items that are mentioned in that minute, which I don't think have been absorbed by the current proposals. But my point is about the minutes, obviously, that I would like to see that point about, and because it's very common in grant application forms to have an indication of how many words is the maximum for particular bits of the form, and that in itself is a challenge, because it's much easier to write at length than it is to write briefly and to the point. And I think that's an important indication of professionalism. So if that could be part of it.
Thank you for that.
Because I remember saying.
I can remember it being said, so that can be added in. That's not a problem. And I think in terms of the actual content of what's presented, Claire, we can pick those up when we get to that agenda item. Okay? So subject to that additional item being included in this, are there any other comments? If not, would somebody like to propose the minutes? Propose. Second. And vote. Thank you. We've got included in the pack the action log, so there's 1 action that's outstanding that's been brought forward from previous meetings, and that action relates to the policy and criteria for the award of grants, and that will be included in the agenda tonight under item 8. Agenda item 4, do we have any members of the public wanting to make representations this evening?
No request, Chair.
Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 5. This is the terms of reference for the Finance Committee. These were discussed at the STBF annual meeting on the 17th of June, and along with the standing orders. For the standing orders, it was agreed at that meeting that the Town Clerk would review and align the set of STBF standing orders to set standing orders for the STC, and then circulate an updated version to members of the committee for comments. So that's still in train, and then this was about bringing the terms of reference. They were agreed to refer to this meeting, which we're doing now, to particularly around agreeing the levels of delegation for this committee, and this picked up on the point that the STBF itself meets quarterly rather than monthly. It's about making sure that we have the right level of delegations here, and then this would then have to go back to STBF for final approval. So if I could open up the comments first of all from members, particularly on the question of whether the in terms of reference, are sufficient in detail and scope to enable us to make and perform the role that we're required to do at this committee. And that's really about bridging the gap between this monthly meeting and the quarterly STBF. So any comments on the actual terms of reference?
Joe, would it be helpful if I did a table like this to make sure that the committee covers all ground, just for a kind of a systematic approach?
I'm happy with that if others are.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, a bit concerned about the, I'm not sure it's meant to come on the right path, but I thought they could give out grants to individuals.
Can you say that again a bit louder?
I thought the Semi Torbridge Fund, which like we've had, Girl Guides or Scouts go to jamborees, but we've actually sponsored part, yes, they have to raise about, about £5,000-6,000 per jamboree, and sometimes we donated a small amount to their fundraising. So I don't, does that mean say we can't do that anymore, or the Scout Association or the Guides Association have to ask on their behalf?
Okay, so that relates to the grant awards, is that right?
Yeah.
We'll pick that up when we come to that agenda
Yeah.
item. So it does say explicitly the individuals are not included, so we'll discuss it when we get to that agenda item. But regards to terms of reference, Colin?
I'm just wondering, because this committee, like FGP, it's more about more detailed scrutiny and ability to look in more depth at finances, budgets, etc. Whereas obviously the trustee as a whole is responsible for finances and financial viability, etc. So I just wondered, under decision delegated power, to consider the management and control of finances, whether that should just say to consider in depth the management and control of finances.
Any counter views? I'm happy with that. I mean, you can be in more detail, whatever we want to frame it.
It's not a big point, but it's just trying to separate the role of this committee from the overall
STBF.
role of STBF.
Yeah. Okay. Any other comments on the terms of reference?
I'm still a bit worried about there being no mention of co-optees for the museum and archives.
Sorry,
We sort of
co-optees.
slid over it last time.
So we're just looking at the finance committee aspect at the moment.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I assume, I assume the terms of, and it's interesting because they are included here, but I assume that they will be discussed at the Museum and Archives
Yes.
Committee
Okay.
meeting. Yeah.
So the Museum and Archives Committee does still have a role to play in deciding on its own terms of reference, does it?
It will be invited to comment, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Any other comments on the terms of reference for this meeting?
Happy with
Well, it does say committees do not have individual budgets, are advisory and do not have powers to enact unless resolved.
Yeah.
I can understand that, but I think, things, for me, I would like to understand what the budget is for the museum, how much the museum costs us and so forth. And I think it would be helpful to the museum committee to understand exactly what their budget is so that they can bring things forward as appropriate.
Any comments on that?
Again, this is something that obviously we've only got the museum coordinator and the RFO, so it is a capacity issue at the moment. We are working on things like this, and obviously with the new finance system, that is going to make it, more, come forward quicker. But I can't promise that that'll be ready for the next meeting because that's only next week.
Okay.
I think those are more issues for the business plan work, what's the value of our services, etc.
Well, yeah, and I think in terms of applying for grants from other bodies to be able to say we have a museum here, it costs us 133,000 a year or whatever it costs us to run it, and we need X amount of money. So I think it would be helpful.
Does it apply for grants, doesn't she, on behalf of the museum? which had quite a lot of grants, you know, with the Wheels of Time exhibition and these other exhibitions. So that is part of her response to apply for grants.
Yeah, understand that, but I think if she knew what the total cost of the museum was, it would be useful information when she's applying for
I think
it.
that's up to the committee, not to the, not her response. I think it's up to the museum committee's responsibility.
Well, that's why I'm asking for a budget for the museum, for the museum committee.
So my observation would be that that would be taken to the Museum and Archives Committee rather than this. We can't determine that for that committee, so if that's some way that that can be taken there.
You need the RFO for that, don't you? You know, there's no good banging that here. You need to ask the question of the RFO. She's the one with all the figures.
Yeah.
But there's also unquantifiable costs in there because the museum is run by volunteers. You know, if we had to pay them, it would cost them a lot more.
Yeah.
That counts when you make an application, you can count
Yeah.
volunteer hours
Yeah.
as part of an in-kind contribution from outside.
So what do we agree
So-
in terms of that? So
The point I was picking up to review all budgets is part of the remit here, and I'm suggesting such as the budget for the museum.
which picks up on the point earlier about the deeper analysis of the information, the financial information, so we can weave that in, particularly with the objectives that you're going to provide for this mission as well. Yes, Martin.
Specifically the point that I was going to come to is that we need an overall understanding of the costs involved. It's not it's feeding into a wider debate. It's not
So-
control grab.
So would that be similar to the Finance and General Purposes Committee, that we need to have a more detailed analysis of the budgets for the STBF at some point, be it twice a year or other periods? Is what we're asking. More detailed analysis of the budgets that run under the STBF.
I would expect that to be our job to some extent.
Yeah.
But, not it's a question, in my view, I'm not sure if this is also Councillor Green's idea. In my view, it's just something we should be informed about and aware of. It touches on your work in the STC working group as well, as to the relationship between the two. But as I say, for me, it's something that we should be aware of as part of the overall picture.
I think there's a perception in the town that the Tollbridge Fund has got a whole heap of money and it should be spending it. And it's important therefore that we understand what the budget is from the Tollbridge Fund and how it's been apportionated and what things are actually costing. And it's different from the deep dive, which is just basically balance and checks that we're doing things properly.
So in terms of taking this forward, is there an opportunity to sit down and try to see what we might be able to organise? And I'm happy to do that and be involved in that. Yeah. But first, if I could have your output document, that would be helpful as a reference point. Okay. So if we take that as an action and we look to come back in time, hopefully for the next meeting, and if not, certainly by. We're not meeting for August, are we?
No.
So that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's for September's meeting. Yeah. Any other comments?
No, it's good.
Yeah. Based on that action we're taking forward, is anyone willing to propose that we accept terms of reference?
I propose.
Second.
That's it.
Second.
Use it.
No, I think
Can do.
Councillor Wilson has seconded it.
Okay.
and we'll go to
Accepted.
So we do have enough time because the next time the STBF will meet will be,
After the, I think it is after the finance committee, because it's towards the end of September.
so we should have time to then take a final version to the STBF. Yeah, okay. Right, so we now move on to agenda item 6. There's a number of payment schedules to approve. There's also a number of financial budget variances and bank reconciliations. And we also have been asked to receive a quarter Cheviot report for June 2024. So I was going to suggest, if the group is happy, that we take first of all, the payment schedules en bloc, take any comments on them, and then go for them en bloc once we've worked through those comments. In terms of payment schedules, it's attachments 3A to 3D. Has anybody got any comments to raise on those? Yes, Peter.
On attachment 3E, there is a payment of £270 to the rights of way. I'm nominated as the rights of way outside body. I don't know what that payment is for. Sure, I don't know who it's to.
Kent County Council. Kent County, it's the Kent County Council, the right of way officers. They generally have a meeting, sort of pre-COVID. They used to have an annual meeting, and then the delegated people, all the parishes used to meet up, and they used to explain all the, about reporting blocked footpaths, overgrown footpaths, damaged footpaths. But at the moment, it's all sort of up in the air.
Well, as the town clerk knows, I've written to the rights of way officer at Kent County Council.
So I'll have to take this back to the RFO, and what I would say to all the committee members is what I said on the Human Resources Committee. If you've got any specific questions, can you please raise them with me before the meeting, because then I've got an opportunity to ask that of the officer and get, hopefully the answer.
There's a fair point, particularly with the financial documents we had in this meeting, that is if the finance officer generated these, it's important that any questions in terms of specific detail are raised beforehand, because it's not, it's unfair to expect to have no answers to all of them. So hopefully we can accept these payment schedules with that as an action.
Well, I can send Karen a message and just find out. Apologies,
Thank you.
I shouldn't have raised it, I should have contacted.
There's just one that's a personal one for me. Attachment 3I. Halfway down the page it says Councillor Wiles and Miss Harkelt. It was nothing, the hiring of the courtroom was nothing to do with me being a councillor. It was just as a private citizen. So that can be amended.
We've sort of jumped into the second set, but that's fine.
No, sorry.
No, that's all right.
No, I had a couple earlier on, but
Yeah.
given what you've said, I won't raise them now.
No. Okay. Any other comments on attachments 3A to 3D? If not, if somebody's happy to propose them? Councillor Pennington, anybody? Councillor Franklin, second them and vote. Okay. So the second set is the financial budget variances and bank reconciliations, and they are documents 3E to 3J. We've taken one comment from Councillor Lars. Have we got any other comments at all? If not, somebody's had to propose them.
So about the car park, our bit at the back. Since they've done the doctor's surgery, there's a massive great empty space, isn't there? I often wonder whether we could get a consultant just to look at it so we can get some extra spaces in there to raise more revenue.
Okay, so I think that's a fair point, Jeff, and I think that'll be worth logging with the property manager as one of some things to look at.
Maybe we might get another 8 spaces in there or something.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other comments?
The property manager will have an annual target for additional revenue. Yeah.
Okay, somebody have to propose these?
I propose.
And just, Councillor Franklin, votes. Okay. And the final papers is the Court of Cheviot report for June 2024. We've been asked to receive those. Any comments on this? I do have one. Anybody else?
Because I have raised regularly whether or not we're getting as good as we can as a rate of return.
Yep.
And I have to say I have a portfolio and I looked at it just before the meeting, and my portfolio, I know people say, oh, but the Court of Cheviot investments are all low risk. Well, mine is medium low risk, and it's invested entirely, because I insist upon it, in ethical investments, which are not supposed to be particularly good as far as returns are concerned. And it is actually returning at the moment 2.5%, which is better than the 2% that's coming on through with Cheviot. So I think there are grounds for querying this particular company. There may be exit penalties, it may be too much of a hassle to try and change it.
Yep.
We're clearly not losing an enormous amount of money from getting a somewhat lower return. But what is happening, and of course these figures are extremely useful, is the drawdown that has been varying enormously from year to year. Since 2009, when they started, as I imagine, to run this portfolio.
Yes.
It's just extraordinary, that variation. And they've advised us that we should be running at 3.5% to 4%.
Yep.
And almost always, but not always, it's been considerably more.
Yeah.
And once or twice, 2 years in particular, 2020 and 2022, it was over 10%.
Yes. I mean, that was exactly my observation of this report, was exactly that point.
Perhaps we should have a word and ask us, a higher risk,
Yes, so
because I'm a trustee of another charity, and they've just gone in with Court of Cheviot, and they're very pleased with their results.
Yeah.
So it depends whether I think you should just ask them to take a slightly higher risk, perhaps with some of the shares.
So I think
I'm not suggesting, because mine runs at medium low, and there are 3 categories above that.
Yeah, I know we did try the hand a bit with ethical policies and what we could, a couple of years
Yes,
ago.
I know, but mine is also.
Yeah, that's what I'm just saying. If we can get them to come here, we could ask them to raise our risk level.
So we've already got that logged as an action through STBF itself,
Yeah.
and I believe it's been progressed, isn't it?
Yes.
We potentially are going to look at it being a Zoom meeting, if I recall rightly, conversation, so it may not be face to face, but yes, it's definitely, and it was off the back of your suggestion, Jeff, that we would have a discussion with them about what's a higher risk.
I mean, might be a bit share our speech, but that's some people might say, oh, we don't want armaments companies, you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
It's very difficult sometimes.
So I think in terms of, we raise this nearly every meeting we have around this report. It is down as an action for the town clerk to progress, so we will get that opportunity in due course. So my observation was the same as yours, Claire, was around the majority of the vast majority of the years, the drawdown has been well above the level that's indicated as safe. But I'm not sure that we have any opportunity to be any otherwise in terms of what we're trying to manage as a council. But if we can investigate that through the property manager in time, then that will be helpful.
It's like the boiler, wasn't it? About £100,000, wasn't it? I mean, just around this whole building.
Yeah.
it's expensive. We had to put a new bin through here years ago, you know.
Yeah.
That costs a fortune as well. And it's not allowed for, is it? It's something that suddenly you think, oh God, we got a
Yeah,
new,
we haven't
new
got-
beam,
yeah.
you've just got to go and
We
do
haven't
it,
got
draw the money off.
contingency. Yeah.
Yeah.
Colin.
Yeah, I mean, it's a reminder as well that the Tollbridge Fund is not just this portfolio, it's the assets as well.
Yeah.
So, you know, we need a proper strategic approach to say, do we invest in assets rather than shares or paintings or wine or whatever it might be? Rather than just
Maybe the wine will help.
rather than just
in the cinema.
going along the same old way.
Can I just make the comment that always kind of concerns me when I look at this, and if you look at page 11 and 12 of the report, you'll see that in the month they've done a lot of transactions. They've purchased over £100,000 worth of shares, and they've sold £73,000 worth of shares. So in the month, they've basically turned over 10% of the value of the portfolio, and hidden within these purchase and sales are transaction costs and commissions. And what worries me is that when you look at these reports, they're churning it over every month to their own benefit. Whereas what we would look, and what I would have thought in most portfolios, I have a portfolio too, we go in for long-term stuff and we're not chopping and changing every month. And that's where these people, in my opinion, are not working in our best interests.
So we'll have an opportunity to express all of those views when we
That's how
get
they
to
make money, though, isn't it?
That's how they make money.
Well, how are they going to make money? We don't want to take the commission off our.
They take a commission as well,
Yeah.
but this is an additional transaction commission.
All companies do that, don't they?
No, mine doesn't.
Yeah, but
Mine doesn't charge. I pay them a standard amount. And
What for buying and selling?
I think Councillor Breen's made a good point. You look at the sales, Shell, AstraZeneca, Unilever, Persimmon. I mean, these are all blue chip shares. Why would they be selling them?
That's wrong.
well, perhaps because they're as high as they think they're going. But, you know, we need to know.
I mean, Persimmon, there's about to be a house building boom. Their shares are likely to go up.
Churning, that's the name, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
Churning, yeah.
And it's,
I think we have to deal with it as a portfolio level. We can't really go back every month with a list of questions. Why would you sell this and why would you sell that? I think we need to have that conversation with them regards the risk that we're attaching to it, the exclusions we want in relation to our portfolio, and then let's hear what they say. Okay, any other comments? No? So in terms of the report and the financial statements they provided, there are two recommendations to put to the committee, and that's the committee receives as the updated terms of reference from Quilter Cheviot, and secondly that the committee receives a breakdown of the performance figures and annual withdrawal figures. Is anybody happy to propose we receive both of these?
Yep.
Yeah. Second. Jeff. Okay, and vote it. Thank you. Okay. So we've got one more item. I can get to it on my agenda. Just bear with me.
I've done this one already.
Yep, so agenda item 7, I'm hoping that we don't need to discuss the report on the Advantage Finance software because we've had that information in the previous meeting. Are we happy to receive and note the report?
Seconded.
Okay. And then the final item probably substantial one. Hopefully we'll get some helpful input in terms of the documents that have been provided. So we've got, okay, once I can get through my pages. So the substantial item is relates to the action that we had at the last meeting, which was to generate a grants process review, and that in the main has been undertaken by the Town Clerk, Councillor Wiles and myself. You've got 3 documents shared for this meeting, and it's really to seek your input on those documents. I think maybe some comments against the documents, so maybe we should go through each of the documents one by one. But if I let the Town Clerk maybe to introduce it first.
Thank you. Yes, so we, as the Chair said, we've been working on some documents, and it is the proposal to seek comments and feedback from this committee on the review of the criteria and the policy for the Town Bridge Fund grants process. There's an open funding process that has been operating until now that gives access to the opportunity to apply for funding all year round. The budget's discussed each year in November, and it's set for the ensuing fiscal year from April. The trustee were mindful this year that the budget for 24-25 of £10,000 should be allocated over 2 tranches of funding applications. The trustee awarded £6,500 in March 2024, which was the first tranche, and it was suggested that the next round of funding should be considered later in the year, September or October this year. The committee hope will now consider updating the criteria and policy for the Toddbridge Fund grants and review the process involved. We have worked on drafting these documents to update the criteria and policy for debate, and there is also a draft evaluation form attached to the report for consideration. I do know from the RFO as well that there has been an evaluation process previously, so I do actually have that form that she had been using previously. So if members are happy, I could pass you around a copy of that so that you can have that to look at as well. Thank you. But this is just grants feedback form that has been operated previously. Obviously, you've got the evaluation form that I've drafted for you as well. It's just really for information so you can see what's been operated previously. Thank you.
Thank you. So, as I say, we've got 3 documents. If you could deal with each one individually, and the first one is the criteria for grant applications. So could I open it up to take any comments on the criteria that's been drafted?
Is that the one that I was talking about?
Yes.
Because I mean, if it's a girl guide going to or scout for the national jamboree or international jamboree, I mean I think that's good for the whole town. But if she applies through the Girl Guide, that's a national organisation, or the Scouts, isn't it? So really, I'm not quite sure how that would go for individuals.
Can I ask Councillor Wiles in terms of this document?
The one that worries me is the Scouts and the Girl Guide, when they go to national jamboree, and they have to raise a lot of money individually.
The document,
Individuals have been
the document makes it clear that only organisations can apply. So if it was an individual scout or Girl Guide, they would have to do it through their organisation.
They are a sandwich guide or scout.
So there is an avenue for individuals to make an application via their organisation, as long as the organisation meets the criteria, then the grant application can be reviewed.
But I have to say, if it was an individual, you'd have to ask what benefit that gives to the wider community.
Yeah. That's a good point.
But for Scouts, so it means it reflects back on sandwich Scouts as guides, and it encourages more youngsters to join the organisation.
That could be a case you could argue at the applications.
Councillor Anderson.
Yes, I don't know if we finished with that point, because I mean it's an important point, because not all funding bodies exclude the possibility of funding individuals, but most do. And we're obviously copying that of any funding organisation. But I just wanted to make the point that you say in each case the applicant must include a copy of the Constitution, etc., a copy of their latest AGM minutes, Well, it's not the case necessarily that organisations that are likely to apply for the Toolbridge Fund are actually membership organisations. So I don't think, so they won't have had an AGM. They'll have had no reason to have an AGM. So I think we need to reword that. A copy of their latest AGM minutes if they are a membership organisation. Because there are organisations that are not.
No, it's a fair point. I think after has been formally adopted by its members, brackets, if it is a membership organisation, close brackets.
Yes.
Okay.
And that, yes. And also made another point, but I'm not quite sure where it is. Oh yes, you say no grants will be made to individuals. You're quite clear on that. But you also say somewhere, oh yes, that it should not, yes, you say grants will not be offered to cover revenue funding, including the running costs and routine maintenance of buildings and equipment. And again, I mean, that's an exclusion which is common, but not necessary. I mean, some funding bodies do fund core costs on the grounds that if they didn't fund core costs, organisations that they want to see survive will fail. And I don't see why you've decided not to fund core costs, because there may well be sandwich organisations that if they don't get £1,000 to cover their rent or whatever it is that they need to cover their electricity bill, they'll fail, and that would not be a good idea for sandwich as a whole.
Is this on the same point, Councillor?
Yes. I think it's a viability issue. An organisation that needs to come for a grant for routine expenditure, sort of what happens when they've used the grant. The risk is there that you become embroiled in a situation where they become dependent on it, and I think that's the usual reason for excluding something which is purely routine costs. Now, I know that some organisations could ramp up routine costs in private budgeting, but
there are now, I'm glad to say, funding bodies that will fund core costs.
yeah.
But they'll do it for a limited time with the expectation that you will find some other way of dealing with whatever the issue is.
So I'll come back to Councillor Wiles if Councillor Franklin is, I'll take you first if it's on the same subject.
Well, it is really, because I've been involved with Sandwich Club for 18 years, and very often maintenance costs, you know, what I think went on equipment and running the building, the insurance, everything else. But when it comes to maintenance, that was a real struggle. So we did come to here, and then when you applied for Dover District or Kent County Council, they say, oh, what are you getting for town? They do all match funding, don't they? So I think there should be exceptions. It shouldn't be rock solid with no, but I think it should be exceptions. If it weren't for the town council or Tollbridge Fund, the youth club was probably shut about 30 years ago.
So Councillor Wiles, can I ask a question for you?
Yeah.
Come back in as well. Was this not a carry forward of what was the previous part of the criteria? I.e., you haven't invented this as a new restriction. It was long-standing in the previous criteria. So I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah. I think my point on that would be, if we're funding revenue, we might fund it one year, the next year we don't. So the organisation either becomes unviable or it has to get funding elsewhere. I think any organisation that's seeking grants for day-to-day expenditure is not a viable organisation.
This was for building major maintenance,
Well,
like re-roofing the youth club.
yeah, maintenance
There's nothing that was budgeted for.
You can call that as a capital cost,
Can't
can't
be
you?
an exceptional.
It's a capital cost. I'm just trying to find the bit where it says about,
Well, it's
It's
under
Other
conditions
conditions
of
of a grant, bullet number 3.
well, why don't we just change that to say grants will not generally be offered to cover revenue funding?
Yes.
You know, just to say, we'll consider it as an exception, but
Just a bit of common sense at the time.
yeah.
I mean, it will never be a large amount of money.
No.
But the whole point about matched funding as well is
Take a hard line.
Yeah, I prefer to be very clear on this bullet that we might want to put in something about an exceptional circumstance. So, for example, routine maintenance would not extend to a exceptional circumstance of
Roof.
Because when I was doing it, I mean, it was actually doing like transport, we had to link it with projects in France and in Belgium
Yeah.
to get money for Sandwich Youth Club. That where the boxing club is, that extension there.
So I
It didn't have the match funding.
I prefer to expand it to say exceptional circumstances relating to maintenance of buildings will be considered. Would that be okay? Rather than if you start with general, then that means every time you can deviate from that. Would that make sense?
Depends what you mean by maintenance. If it's a one-off roof repair, to me that's a capital project.
Okay.
But
Yeah,
if
be more specific.
it's just, you know,
Yeah.
annual replacing the light bulb,
Right.
Painting is different, isn't it?
yeah, or annual regular painting, it's different.
So could we just, can I suggest then we can just extend that, say this does not exclude
Project work.
capital, one-off capital projects. Are you comfortable with that? Yeah. Okay. Any more comments on the criteria?
I think it's important to make it clear that the blurb at the beginning where it says any surplus arising, that's the surplus after all of the running costs of the charity have been dealt with and the management and maintenance of its assets have been dealt with. So it's pure surplus.
Yeah. Okay. We happen to move on to the second document, which is attachment 5. That's the grant application form.
Yeah. Well, this is where I would
Yes.
like word indications and a brief description of project. You could say 50 words or 100. And then what is the main purpose of the organisation? Perhaps 250 or something, 300 words. But I mean, you need to think about it. It is a lot, but it's still. I mean, lots of people want to write over that.
Yeah.
And it's much easier to write at length than it is to write to the point.
So it's been on the first page. So the first is a brief description of the project. So what we should, I think we probably need to say something like no more than
Yes.
to give them the scope. And if yes,
50.
yeah, more than 50 words.
And same with the organisation, purpose of organisation.
Yeah.
You can't describe your organisation in 50 words. then
Okay.
Whereabouts
Oh
is
yeah,
that?
that one.
The main purpose of your organisation.
Then Claire, you mentioned another one that was 250. Which section was that?
Well, description of the project.
Yes,
What is
the other
it?
page.
I
Yeah.
mean, I've just filled in one where it was maximum of 300 words.
Mm.
It's enough.
I would say 50 words for both of those.
50.
For brief description of project and what is the main purpose of your organisation. Surely you can describe it.
So
Yeah, we've done that.
we've done that. Yeah,
Yeah.
we're over the page now.
Okay.
So I think on pick up on Claire's indication around this. I think 250 for each of those two boxes would be reasonable. That's the description of the project, and that's what are your aims for the project.
Yeah, sure.
To what extent will this project event
Yes,
support?
that should have a minute.
Yeah. So 250 again, or
Yeah.
just keep it simple and consistent. And then the final box the same as well. Why do you
Yeah,
think?
yeah, 250.
Should there be a limit on how many times they can apply for a grant? Should it be a seat, say maximum 3 times?
And then you made that point before and so valuable, and that's why in here it does come up as the final set of questions, Jeff, which is have you received a grant within the last 3 years? And then to provide that information, I think that becomes part of the process of assessing each one. Right.
Some of the organisations automatically think they're going to get a grant, then they get nasty about it.
It's called a dependency function.
Yeah. It's not right though, is it? Because sometimes when you start a different organisation, then it's fresh. Yeah, they should be generating enough income by then.
Can we move on to, I didn't understand under project event planning, this question about if the project is land or property related, what is the nature of the interest? I mean, we're not talking, we're talking very small sums of money. The Tillage Fund is never going to have more than £10,000 to spend between a whole bunch of sanctuaries. So what do they expect? What are they expecting them to be buying or leasing? I don't understand.
I think this was just a box that was carried forward from the last. But yeah, I mean, let's say it was a project to open a pop-up advice centre or something. That could be relevant. You know, if they had to take on a lease or a tenancy.
Or it could, for example, be a small plot of land that's going to be used, for example, for biodiversity. So that could be just a small house.
Maybe fish and chips as well, okay? You know, because you feel that's what it is.
So any other comments on that document? And a lot of the remaining detail is actually carried forward in terms of the previous.
Yes, and it's wrong. I'm afraid.
Okay.
There's reference to the Disability Discrimination Act 1995, and they're supposed to include some stuff about it as well. And that act was entirely replaced by the Equality Act in 2010. So I think you need to go through all this legislation, make certain that there's still in operation, because I know of at least one that isn't.
The town clerk can check
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, that will be taking some action.
I'm just wondering on.
Because it does actually say somewhere there's a question whether you've taken account of the Disability Discrimination Act, and that's not existing.
Okay.
I was just wondering on Councillor Franklin's point whether there should just be a separate box. It says, have you received a grant within the last 3 years? Before that, perhaps, have you applied for a grant within the last 3 years?
Yes.
Because then you can see,
So that's an additional box. Yeah.
an additional box.
What can I say in terms of all of this about children and vulnerable adults? There is the disclosure in that barring service, and people who are working with those should be certified and cleared by the disclosure and barring service.
And there's 2 levels. There's basic and then there's
Enhanced.
Yes, and you have to decide which one you want.
I had that, but when I got in the football club, it's the younger one, I had to have an FA one as well.
Yeah.
They didn't like the organisers, so you had to have a football association to say you were safe with young children. I was quite surprised at that, because I thought the other one was quite
Because the FA was that notorious coach, wasn't it?
Thank you. Okay. We have to move on to the process itself. So this was picking up on the point that what we wanted to do was improve the vetting of applications. It also recognises the request that we actually manage the process rather than allow the applications manage us. So this was to introduce the 2 rounds of applications and awards each year. That's all covered in this document, and the question is whether it's sufficient in terms of how it's been explained.
I think it makes sense. And that we've said repeatedly, with too many applications come here which are not ready to be looked
Yes.
at.
Yeah.
And we need a better pre-vetting
Yeah.
process.
Because don't forget, as soon as depending on when we adopt these, we are actually moving into the next round of review in the autumn. We only have 3,500 of the 10,000 left to allocate. So it is only quite a small sum, so I'm not sure where we are with bids.
We've got one at the moment.
Can the town council apply for a grant? I was just thinking of them planters at the market, they look terrible, don't they? They probably look
about that too, yes.
terrible.
I think we probably get enough help from the STBF already.
There's a conflict of interest there.
Okay, so there's no comments on the process itself. We move to the recommendations. So there are actually 3 recommendations to go through. The first is that the committee approve the draft criterion policy for the grants, subject to the actions identified. Is somebody happy to propose approving that? Councillor Green, seconded by Councillor Franklin. And for the votes. Second recommendation is the committee agrees the process for TBF grant applications, including an evaluation process to monitor the outcomes and track the sustainability of groups, events, projects. Anybody happy to propose that? Councillor Green, second. Councillor Pennington, approve. All in approved. And the final one is the committee recommended adoption of a revised criteria, policy and associated documentation by the trustee. Same again. Councillor Green, Councillor Pennington, and all in agreement. So the intention is to take this to the next, which is in September.
Yes.
Does that give enough time to implement it this year, or are we going to need to implement it for the next financial year? If it's approved.
If it's approved, because I think the anticipation was that the application that we have would be heard at the next trustee Tobbridge Fund meeting.
Right.
So I don't know if the applicant, it depends on really how many applications we've got, I think.
Okay, yes.
To be fair to the person that's already applied, maybe you could bring this in for next year.
Yeah, I think in my personal preference is it's for next year we adopt this to give enough time for those that typically apply have opportunity to reflect on the guidance. So that would be sensible, I think. Yeah. Okay. Right, so thank you very much. Moving on to the last agenda item, which is date and time of next meeting, and that's Wednesday the 18th of September. And again, it will follow the F&GP committee meeting, and it will be in this room. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Meeting closed.